So, good afternoon, everyone. I guess it's barely afternoon. It is really nice to see all of you and have you with us today for WASDA's new director network, webinar number 5. I see a couple familiar names. I know that some of you have joined us before, and it's wonderful to have you with us. Can everyone see my PowerPoint okay? Should say, just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, good. That's great. Nothing's worse than launching a webinar and having no one see your webinar but yourself. So thanks for being here. My name is Tricia Lubach. I am the Director of Leadership Development. I'm joined here by my colleague, Christine Naharo, who is the Leadership Development Coordinator. And if you call WASDA or reach out to us for any training or resources, particularly support for new school board members, you will get one of us. We're the team that answers questions and provides training and resources. So happy to have you here today. You will note that we are recording this webinar, so I just want to let you know that. Few of you have your cameras on, and that's wonderful. And a few of you have them off, and that's just fine too. Recognize some of you may be eating lunch or doing something else. That is no problem. We're just really happy to have you join us today. Just a couple of tips here before we launch into the rest of this is that if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature. So it's down at the bottom of your screen. It's next to the chat, but if you could use the Q&A rather than the chat, that'll be helpful for us. We generally don't take too many questions throughout the webinar itself, but we save a significant amount of time at the end. So as questions come to you, pop them into that Q&A box, and we will be sure to give you plenty of time to get them answered. So just a reminder, if you've been with us before, you've seen this slide. There are three branches at WASDA through which we support your work as a Washington School Board member. There's the policy and legal branch, which does exactly what it says and provides you with model policies, legal resources, and policy support. Strategic advocacy is the branch that really focuses on helping you be effective communicators in your community, with the legislator, with other decision makers within education. And then leadership development, which is the branch that Christine and I lead. So if you went to board boot camp, either at the annual conference in the fall, or perhaps you are doing it online, this graphic will look familiar to you. It really lays out sort of an overview of the different school board responsibilities. Setting the vision, mission, and goals through your strategic plan is one role of school board members. Financial oversight is another. Community engagement is a third area, and that's really the area that we're going to be focusing in on today. Communication and doing that effectively, which can be a real puzzle as a new school board member. So I've got a wonderful expert to share lots of expertise with you today. Policy, of course, you've already, I'm sure, become well familiar with policies at this point. Hiring and evaluating the superintendent, that is not only a really important role to support growth for your superintendent, but also is required by law of you. And then monitoring district performance. So always keeping an eye on how are students doing. It is the guidance and the governance that we're providing a good framework for student support and student success. So I am going to start. Before I start, Christine, just a request. Can you keep an eye on folks as they're coming in and let them in? I knew you would do that without me asking, but I can't see them now. So
yeah, no problem.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I am really pleased to introduce our guest today, J. Marie Reish. J. Marie and I have known each other for a number of years. I don't even know how long now. Both of us come from a communication background, but I work for WASDA, and J. Marie runs her own agency where she provides communication support. And I am going to turn it over to her now. She's talking today about effective communication strategies for school board members. And I know firsthand that can be a real challenge in knowing what to say, what not to say, how to do it as a new school board member. So, J. Marie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, friend.
So I'll give just very briefly a little background about myself. I used to be the communications director for Snohomish Public Schools. And it tickles me to be able to say, at the turn of the last century. Um, but about 20 years ago, I started my own business and have been working with school districts across the state and nation on it started out doing a lot of work around bonds and levies. Over time, it also grew to include particularly a focus on labor management communications and communication support for districts dealing with labor stoppages. And from there, it then grew into a real focus on all manner of crisis communications management and any of those larger projects that involve engaging the community, whether it's just major decisions or shifts in policy. And these days, I am a full-time working nomad, so I am joining you here from Alaska, and I'm in a cafe, and so I will apologize in advance if any of the background noise bleeds through. I've got noise-canceling headphones, so it's not coming through for me, but I've been told that occasionally the background noise will come through as I'm speaking. So if that happens, I apologize for any distraction that would cause. Let's go to the next slide. Here today, we're going to really focus on what I have seen. So I guess in addition to the communications kind of direct consulting work that I've done with school districts over the last 20 plus years, I also do a lot of adult education because I have a really deep passion around communications as a critical component of any leader's capacity to do your work well. Essentially, anything that you want to be able to do, you've got to engage your community in order to be able to do it well. And the bigger the topic or the more controversial the topic, the more important it is that you reach out to your community and engage them in effective ways. So for me, the opportunity to provide sessions like what we're doing here today is actually my favorite work, as I essentially get to share these ideas with you, and then you all get to carry that work forward into your larger communities. So we'll talk a little bit about my bias, that it is your job not just to represent your own ideas, but that as a school board director, you are representing the will and the perspective of your broader community. And that doesn't always mean that your broader community's opinions or perspective will win the day. There's times when, you were also elected to bring your good judgment to the party. But it is important that you are intentional in the ways in which you listen and engage that larger community so that you can, with integrity, make sure that you representing the full community, but also that your thinking is informed by the breadth of your community. So we'll talk a little bit about that as a bias, but more importantly, some things you can do to help you increase that breadth of perspective. We will also talk about, I think probably the most popular topic I offer is a session called What to Say When You Can't Say Much. And so I've pulled some highlights from that session for us to cover here today, because you often are dealing with situations in your job, in your role as a board member, that are appropriately confidential. You're dealing with issues that might involve personnel matters, student disciplinary matters, negotiations, legal matters, issues that come up that might create liability for the district, and therefore you need to be mindful about how you talk about it. So those kinds of situations, I think, are some of the things that make board members, especially new board members, the most nervous. You don't want to say the wrong thing, and you also don't want to come across as being protectionist or dishonest or not fully transparent. And the truth is, there are things that you can say, even in those most highly confidential situations. And we'll talk about that, both how to say what are the things you can say and how to gracefully help people understand the limits that you are dealing with, and then how to point them in a better direction when they're really kind of trying to focus in on something that's more detailed than what you can share. Related to that, but a little bit, I'm calling it out a little separately, is, what do you do in the reporter's call? And what do you do when you're stuck in the broccoli section, standing over the broccoli in the produce aisle, and a constituent wants to talk to you about something that either is more detail than you have time and energy to go into at that moment, or is, per the previous bullet, things you can't really talk about. So we'll go into that a little bit. And I am planning to reserve the last 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A so that we can really dig into the topics that are most on your mind and heart. So please do make use of that Q&A section, just so you don't lose track of if a question pops in your mind while I'm presenting. But then also know we'll open it up for Q&A in a broader sense towards the end of the session. So friend, please go ahead and advance the slide. Thank you. So, I already kind of teased this content in terms of, I have a really, in terms of my bias, but I'll share a little further where my bias around community engagement comes from. Not only do I, professionally have a heart around the importance of communications and engaging the breadth of the community. And of course, as a communications professional, I think this function is important. But I think it's important not just as one of many important functions, but I think that communicating well with the public is our job in public education on kind of an order of magnitude higher level than it might be in other organizations, because I genuinely believe that public education is a cornerstone, perhaps the most important cornerstone of a functioning democracy. And I also firmly believe in that. It's a quote that has been attributed to Winston Churchill and debunked is not coming from Winston Churchill, but either which way I like it. And that is that, democracy is the worst form of government other than every other version that's been tried. And I genuinely believe that anytime decisions are made that affect us, any of us, we could have a voice in the direction, in the dialogue, and in the ultimate decision that's made. And the way that we do that on a broad scale is through democratic voting and electing representatives. And the national level, I think many of us look at the way, our national politics ebb and flow through times of being more polarized and more deal. And certainly we're in a season that is highly polarized. And that one of the downsides of highly polarized seasons like what we're in right now is that it scares a lot of the middle ground people out of the conversation. It makes people feel like they don't have an opportunity. Maybe they don't want to wade into a conversation that's so polarizing, but also I think it undermines our collective and that personal sense that what we say matters and that we can influence how those big decisions are made. And certainly at the national level, I think most people think it's near impossible to have an opportunity to really affect what's happening. And I would say at a state level, it's only marginally better. I think most of us would say that it's really hard to influence what actually happens at Olympia and how those Olympia decisions play out in our local communities. But at the local level, in your local community, anybody can show up to a board meeting, to a curriculum committee meeting, can request a time with a superintendent or a principal or one of you, and can influence how you think and can affect the outcome and the direction of education in your local community. And so communications is at the heart of that. So not only is education at the cornerstone of democracy from a standpoint of creating an educated populace who can participate meaningfully in the process, but it's at the cornerstone of democracy from a standpoint that in many communities, especially smaller communities, school district is the largest organization out there. We're often the largest employer or one of the largest employers. And we are making decisions that affect the next generation, that affect what's most precious to us, which is our children and who's coming along behind. And your ability to hear what your community says, but not just hear it, but to reflect back that you heard it. That is where you go from just listening as an informational activity, that you listen to your community so that you know what's important to them, and so that then you can make good decisions, encompassing and respecting those community priorities. But if you take the time to reflect back to your community, to say, I heard you, I started out thinking this, We engaged in the community through public comment, through a survey. We directed the superintendent to reach out to staff, whatever the appropriate listening strategies are for the issue at hand. And because of what we heard through those different listening opportunities, I'm now thinking differently. Or it was affirmed in my initial thinking that what you all shared with me affirmed that those are the appropriate priorities for leading, guiding how I think about this decision. If you will take a moment as a leader when you're making big decisions to do that kind of, educators and curriculum directors might call it making your thinking visible. You'll pause when you're in the midst of these big decisions to say back, heard from the community, this is what matters to the community, and those priorities are reflected in the decisions that we're making here today. Then you affirm for people that it is worth it for them to engage in the democratic process at the local level. And so that's probably about enough to say about that, but that really is at the heart of why I think that these skills are so important. So, as I've noted, your job is to represent the fullness of your community. It doesn't mean you will always agree with, in fact, you can't possibly agree with every individual in your community because your community includes a wide breadth of perspective on any given topic, as you have and will continue to hear. But you can reflect that back. And some tricks or strategies that I would encourage you to keep in mind is, the general public does not understand the distinctions that you do about the purpose of your business meetings. Your business board meetings are, as I know you've heard from your WSSDA colleagues many times, they are a meeting held in public, which is different from a public meeting in that you are operating with transparency so that anyone has the opportunity to view your business practices. But there's only limited opportunity within a typical board meeting, business meeting, for people from the public to speak. And generally speaking, those opportunities are very limited, either whether you use Robert's Rules of Order or some other similar business meeting protocol. Those opportunities for public speaking are not invitations to dialogue. And I think the average community member does not understand that distinction. And so that contributes to a perspective that maybe you already rubber stamped these decisions, that you don't care what they have to say, that it wasn't worth their time. And so I'm not suggesting you change your meeting format. Those Robert's Rules of Order and other meeting formats are important so that you can function, so that you can move effectively and efficiently through the important business of the district. But I am suggesting that if you don't already have a few sentences that your board chair says at the opening of each public comment period, that you draft them so that you can give people who are there the context for how your meetings do and don't work, and or do work, and what is and isn't acceptable from a process standpoint, so that people know that you are going to listen to them meaningfully, that this, because of the nature of these meetings, this is not a time for dialogue. So please don't expect board members to respond in this moment to what you have to say, but know that you will be heard respectfully and sincerely, and that staff members may follow up with individuals who bring forward comments as is appropriate based on the comments that are here. That way you're helping them understand what will and won't happen during that meeting. And then I also encourage you to consider creating opportunities throughout the year. And maybe it's just one or two of your work sessions. This can be especially for a smaller district or an organization where you've already got a lot of meetings relative to the number of people available to, run the meetings. I'm not suggesting that you need to create a whole slew of additional meetings, but even just one or two times throughout the year where you perhaps open up one of your board work sessions and advertise it as an opportunity for your community to come engage in dialogue with you, helps give you more credibility and more gives people a little more of a sense that while you're not going to engage in dialogue during your business meeting, there are opportunities for people to engage in dialogue. That while this might not be that opportunity does exist. And then you can point people towards that. And you can also point people towards other opportunities to engage with you as board members and the superintendent and other staff as appropriate. If you decide to do that, to create some opportunities within a board work session for more engagement, more dialogue, more give and take, I encourage you to look to meeting formats that do not create a situation where you have one microphone in the room that community members can come take over, because that actually ends up creating a situation where you're being talked at rather than a situation where you're talking with people. And it also, in today's highly polarized environment, can create opportunities where people will come who aren't maybe interested in engaging in the spirit of actual dialogue, but really just want to promote their vision without being open to other people's visions. So rather than have sort of a traditional town hall format where you might have a dais or a stage at the front and a microphone and then a microphone down in the audience so people can come, kind of where you talk at each other back and forth. Think about formats that encourage tabletop dialogue. So perhaps you set up 5 or 6 tables and each board member sits at a table and you might have topics or prompts, or you might sit 2 to a table, however makes sense given the number of people that might show up. But you spread yourselves out at tabletops and you create a set of prompts that help start the conversation around the topic that you want to focus on. And I gave on this slide, there's a couple of examples. There's open space, which is a very non-structured format where you let the people who show up actually determine the tabletop topics. World Cafe, which is also highly structured and which includes sort of people with predetermined prompts that you rotate around the tables to have conversations with different people about the same topic. Gallery walks can be a really lovely way because they feel really informal. You're not sitting at a table kind of eyeball to eyeball with each other, but you set up poster pages around the room with bits of information or question prompts, and you invite people to kind of mingle as if they're at an art gallery. That's why it's called a gallery walk, to go have conversations around each of those poster pages. And there are other formats. I sometimes use a format that I call a middle school science fair. And that the middle school science fair, I think of it because you set up a number of tables, and at each table, you take a subset of the bigger topic. So for example, if you were to do a middle school science fair style session around an upcoming bond proposal, you might have one table that is about historic, current, and proposed tax rates. You might have a table about a particular issue. Like, so you've got a problem with HVACs. And so you might have a table just completely dedicated to let's learn about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. What's going wrong with ours and what would the bond fund for it? You might have a table, another table focused on if you have a current issue that people have a lot of misinformation about. Like at one district I worked in, people all thought the bond was going to pay for teacher salaries. So you might have another table that's specifically focused on the difference between bonds and levies and so forth. And you take this bigger topic of a bond proposal and you chunk it up into smaller topics, and you put a topic at each table, and you put up a poster page with some visually intriguing information or pictures of kids, pictures of the HVAC systems, and you assign staff and board members to each table, and you give people the chance to kind of come in and of their own volition go to each table and get to learn about the topics, the subtopics that are of most interest to them. And you maybe post that one over 2 hours so people can come and go at their leisure. Someone who wants to stay for 45 minutes and really have a detailed conversation at each one of those tables can do that. Someone else who has just 5 minutes can swing by after work, do a quick walkthrough, and continue on their way if needed. So those are just a handful of examples of ways that you can create opportunities to engage with your community that encourage dialogue without giving any one particular community member an opportunity to take over the meeting. And that last piece, I closed the loop. I talked about that on the last slide. Let's continue on. So I also work closely with WASA. That's part of, I have a standing agreement with them that I am available to any WASA member facing a crisis. So most of you, I think your superintendent and perhaps other staff members as well, are members of WASA. And so I work with them to develop this graphic. I think helps explain well what I shared earlier about the importance of start sharing how you have how your thinking has been changed over time as you engage with your community. But I also popped this graphic in here just to let you know that I do offer that service. And so any WASA member who is facing a critical incident can reach out to me, and their initial consultation is covered as part of their WASA membership. There's no additional charge for that. So before we jump into the what can you say when you can't say much topic, I think it's important to understand kind of how our brains function when we're under stress. And when we're under stress, our vision narrows, both literally, we actually, our peripheral vision goes down and we become more laser focused on what is literally in front of us. But also metaphorically, we become very solution oriented when we're under stress. We become less likely to think creatively about a problem. We become more likely to jump on the solution that comes in front of us without necessarily considering multiple different ideas. It also makes it harder for us to hear. I think it's kind of closely related to that minimization of creativity and that desire to be more focused. It makes it harder for us to hear people who are thinking differently from us. And I think that's an important thing for you to remember, because it's true about all of us. We can be as enlightened and engaged and open-minded as anybody on earth. But if we are under stress, if we feel that we are being attacked, even verbally attacked, our brain's natural response is to start pumping out stress response chemicals like adrenaline, cortisol. And it does that because the same system is in place in our brain, whether we feel that we are being socially threatened or whether we feel that we are being physically threatened. Like the brain makes no distinction in those two types of threat, and it responds the same way. And so no matter how great and fancy and, we're good listeners and we got ourselves all together, we're still rocking the same brain. And so we need to be mindful of that. And so you can interrupt that stress response system though. And as a good leader, it's important for you to build your skills at being able to do that, because it will help you listen better, which will help you be a better leader. And one of the best ways, there's lots of different ways to help interrupt our stress response system. And people often find guidance in wisdom traditions, in faith traditions. There can be all kinds of knowledge that we bring to the party that will help us be calm, respectful, present in the face of stressful circumstances. But one of the best tips that works no matter what your background is to use your breathing to control your brain, because there is a direct circuitry that's going on between your brain adrenaline and stress response system and your rate and style of breathing. When you can keep your breathing slower and deeper, it will help your brain know that you are not actually under attack. Because at a most primitive level, you're not going to stop to be, calmly exhaling if you are, running from a predator, right? So the act of slowing down your exhale tells your brain that you're actually physically safe, which is, like I said, in your brain, physically safe and socially safe are the same chemical soup. So, and I remember being told many times, take a deep breath. Well, that doesn't always work well for me because when I'm under stress, and I think I'm pretty typical of how this functions, I'm more likely to be breathing up high in my chest instead of using the fullness of my lungs. And I'm already breathing in a lot. Under stress, you're kind of breathing faster and higher. And so the idea to take a deep breath implies breathing in. But the reality is what will work better is to give a good exhale. So I encourage you to think of calming yourself by managing a good, slow, thorough exhale. And one of the beauties of that is that you can do that in the middle of a heated conversation or in the middle of someone saying unpleasant things to you in public or up at their public comment period. You can give yourself a nice slow exhale and you don't have to make a scene of it, right? I'm not saying you have to go, not helpful. But you can just peacefully give yourself a slower exhale. And the other thing that's beautiful is that our bodies will automatically manage the inhale. So as long as you have fully emptied your lungs, your body will naturally refill them. And that will help your brain to calm itself down. And there's a book by, I'm forgetting the book title. The author is Jill Bolte Taylor. My Stroke of Insight is the book. She was a Harvard brain researcher who had a devastating stroke. And because she was a Harvard brain researcher, she could, in her mind, she was essentially narrating what was happening as her functionality was shifting. She's like, oh, that's shifted. My such and such must have just gotten, the excess blood must have just applied pressure to my such and such. It's a fascinating book. The takeaway that I've pulled from it for purposes of stress management is that she explained that when we get hooked, so if someone says something we don't agree with or that feels like an attack, those brain chemicals start kicking in, and we're on that ride for the next 25 to 90 seconds that it takes for those brain chemicals to process their way through our system. But if you can recognize when you get stressed and give yourself a good slow exhale, then you don't have to stay on that chemical ride any longer than that. You can start to manage that internal process. If you don't notice that you've been hooked, then the initial chemical, the initial brain soup kicks in, and then you feed it with your stressed response. So if you can manage yourself, you can interrupt that process. And I'll let you in on a little secret. There are things in our brain called mirror neurons. And the reality is we are influencing each other all the time at a subconscious level. We are paying attention to others around us, and other people's emotional state will influence us, and our emotional state will influence others. And I like to say that she who's aware of mirror neurons wins, because by being aware of mirror neurons, it gives you an extra incentive to manage yourself well, knowing that by keeping yourself calm, you will help interrupt the other person's stress response system. It's not magic. None of the things I will share here today are magic. If someone's really angry in front of you, you can stay calm all day long and they will still be angry. But you can choose not to add to their anger. You can choose not to be part of an escalation cycle. The other side of acknowledging stress is to acknowledge that the people who are talking to you are also, if they are under stress, then their brains are in this chemical soup as well. It means they're going to have a harder time hearing you. It means that, and so there's two kind of so whats of that. One is that by listening well, staying calm, you don't escalate it. But if you see that someone is stressed as they are talking to you and you dive right into facts, they're not going to hear the facts, because when we are under stress, we need the big emotions to be acknowledged first. So start by acknowledging that this is an important issue, that you see that they feel very strongly about it, and that you share some values with them about this issue. And then you can start talking about the facts. And also understand that when people are under stress, they do not navigate complexity as well, right? They get very focused. So even when you start shifting from acknowledging the emotion into digging into the facts, keep your facts very simple. Stay clear speak in shorter sentences. And it's not intended as an insult to anybody else. It's an acknowledgement and a respect for how our brains function. So with that as a bit of a baseline, let's get into some of the kind of the details of it. So there are a lot of things that you can't go into details about. As I mentioned before, disciplinary action, it's particularly student disciplinary actions. Student records are confidential and appropriately so. Employee disciplinary actions, personnel matters, those things, most of those details are also confidential and protected by legal statute. Negotiations need to be kept confidential because oftentimes the success of the negotiations depends on the people at the table being able to float kind of what if ideas back and forth until they find a solution that is actionable. And of course, when you're dealing with liability, lawyers will hop right in and tell you to be really careful about what you say. And there's a balance there because while on one hand, we want to be as transparent as possible, on the other hand, we don't want to create unnecessary liabilities for the district because those resources are resources that we would rather keep in the classroom. So we've got to navigate that well. But I think one of the things that's important to know is that there are good reasons why you might be limited in what you need to say. And we'll talk about how to reference that here in a moment. Next slide, please. What I would like for you to remember, if you don't remember much else, is please don't say no comment. It's an overused phrase in TV, and it invites speculation. It makes people think you're hiding something at this point because it has been so overused, both in television shows and by politicians. And so instead, here are things you can say. Let's continue on. So even when you can't say a lot, you can always talk about your community values. If your district has done a strategic planning process or has developed a mission, vision, and value statement, then you can absolutely lean on that. If you don't have a formal set of value statements, there's a lot of kind of common sense values that we can speak to, that we place a high priority on student safety is our primary concern because students can't learn unless they are safe. We are a community that cares about one another, and we will be guided by those kinds of values as we make decisions, right? There are things that you can say that are, make sure that what you're saying is always true. It can be aspirational, but you always have to speak the truth. And I will say, if any of the talking points that I offer here in the next couple slides are things that aren't actually true for your district and community, then while they might be generally true, if they aren't specifically true for your community, then please don't use them. It's really important for you always to be speaking the truth. But when you can't say a lot about the details, you can speak about your values. You can talk about how you are guided by policy and procedure and state and federal law. You can talk about supportive resources that are available. So oftentimes and you can ask your district superintendent to gather up resources for appropriate events. There are like the National School Psychologists Association and other groups like that have created talking points and tip sheets for parents, like how to talk to children after a disaster or how to talk to children about accusations of sex abuse. Like they really have quite a wealth of resources are out there. So I encourage you to lean on those appropriate experts as needed. And you can always talk about next steps, even if you're just saying, at this time we are letting the investigation run its course and we must remain neutral and respect confidentiality during the investigation process, but we will report back to you when the investigation is complete. That is a reasonable thing to say as well. Slide, please. And, I mentioned earlier, both because of brain research and just because of how we function, it's really important that you attend to big emotions, that you acknowledge them. And that doesn't mean that we celebrate them or that we want to be careful as leaders that we don't make those big emotions bigger, but we can acknowledge that big emotions exist around certain topics or that people feel strongly about this for very good reasons. And you can say, I feel strongly about this as well, or we have deep values around this. And by starting from that place of acknowledgement before you go over into and here's what we can do at the moment, you not only settle their stress response system, but you indicate respect and care for the person that you're talking to. And so I encourage you always to be prepared to pause and acknowledge kind of the bigger feelings around some of these more polarizing topics. So here's the trick or the skill. I don't like trick because that implies something untoward, but the skill that I encourage you to take away from this. In the media world, they call it bridging. I've added I have added acknowledgement to the front of this, so which makes it conveniently the ABCs. So you acknowledge and empathize with the person in front of you. Then you bridge. And what that means is you go from the question that was asked of you. So maybe they say, I heard about the accusations against the such and such coach. What are you going to do about this? Well, or, we've got to fire that person, right? Or, someone might, come in with really strong opinion. And so, or, what are the details behind, I heard about this accusation, but what do you really know about it? So first of all, you'd start by acknowledging this is a really important issue, and the safety of our kids is absolutely our top priority. And pause. This gives you a chance to think. It slows down the conversation just a little bit. And you might say, I can't talk about the details of the investigation because it's really important that we respect the neutrality of the investigation so that whatever is found to be true, we can act on with integrity. But what I can say is this, and that's the bridge where you tell them, I'm not going to answer the question you asked. But what I can tell you is this, and that's how you bridge over to, and I give some examples there on this slide, things that you can say under a stressful situation. We look at issues like this through the lens of these values, or we're going to be guided by such and such policy, or sometimes, especially during tough labor management negotiations, I think it is important to express confidence. I have confidence in both teams at the labor management table. We have experienced people on both sides of this issue, and they are working hard to find common ground and reach agreement. In cases of legal matters, you might say, we will be working closely with local law enforcement, or we will be working closely with such and such organization as we move this topic forward, or we will be guided by the outcome of the investigation or the committee. So that's how you acknowledge what they're asking. You bridge over and you say, but I can tell you this, and then you point towards those kinds of topics that you are, or the information that you are able to share. Next slide, please. And my gift to you is to say that same skill set, bridging, works just as well in person with a local constituent standing over the top of the broccoli section when they corner you with a question and you're like, for the love of all that is good and holy, I just wanted to get my ingredients for dinner tonight and go feed my family. This is kind of your get out of the conversation free card. You still need to respect, thank you for bringing this issue forward, or I appreciate the strength of your feelings on this matter. I share these values, anything you can say that connects you human to human. And then you might even need, sometimes they are looking for an argument. And if so, your bridge might even be to say something like, you and I are not going to be able to solve this issue here in the produce aisle, but I have the utmost confidence in the labor management teams, or they trust we have a neutral investigator looking into this, and we will take the appropriate action once the investigation is concluded. Or, I can't answer those detailed questions for you, but who can is the director of learning, or this is the kind of topic that I encourage you to take to your child's teacher or to your school principal. Because, another piece of this is anytime folks are bringing forward complaints or concerns about what's happening in their own, their child's school experience, anytime we can point them towards the person closest to the matter, that's where they can actually get their issue resolved. So rather than just, kind of brush someone off, if you can take, 2 minutes to hear them, acknowledge that they feel strongly about it, and then do your own kind of bridging and converting, then you can get yourself, and you might even say, I I appreciate that this is an important topic, and I want you to know this is something the board is taking very seriously. And right now, I'm really under a timeline. I need to get the shopping done so I can get back to my kids who are waiting for dinner. Or, and I have another appointment after this I need to continue on to. So I can't engage in a deep conversation right now. But here's the appropriate outlet for your question or concern, and point people in the right direction. Next slide. So friends, I'm like Trisha, I can't see what's happening in the Q&A, so I'm hoping someone can chime in and start pointing us. What's on your mind? Let's dig in.
Jay Marie, I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now, so we could talk for a couple of minutes while we give people the opportunity to put those in there. Just a couple questions to get us started. What are some of the maybe mistakes or challenges that you see brand new school board members, maybe in their first year, first month, first 6 months, first year, making? And what are some of the remedies you might suggest to them?
So yeah, I think probably one of the most common one for the newer folks is our community. Most of the elections that happen, and certainly most of the elections that get most of the media attention, are elections for people at the legislative level. And those folks often speak very, sometimes bombastically, but at least with confidence about what they're going to do. And I think that creates the perception in the community that school board members are the same, that they are going to act, individually, and that if I come to a school board member with my complaint, I can get them on my side, and then they're going to just, run with it as an individual. And I think we come into that, people who get elected have that background. It's just sort of the way things often get portrayed in our community. And so we can have that bias kind of in the back of our minds as well. And so I think getting really kind of grounded in the idea that you act as a board, that, that decisions get made when you come together as a duly elected, appropriately public noticed body. And so that you can reflect that back to the constituents as well. I think that's an important remedy to that misperception that board members can make decisions as individuals.
Great, thank you. I think that's really important, helping people bridge that gap between being a candidate and then being one member of a board. That can be really challenging. As you learn more as a new board member, you realize, some of those promises I made might be pretty hard to fulfill. Or
yes,
they're already even being done in the district and I didn't know about it. I've got two great questions in the queue here. The first one is, are there some words that are trigger words that we should avoid?
Let my brain think on that for a moment. And can we go to the other question? And I promise we'll circle back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could pop in just a little bit on that one and then we can jump over to the other. I think anytime you are labeling someone, if someone is saying something and you're labeling them, whether or not they identify with that label, that can be it can be a really negative way to kind of other someone. Maybe it's a label like, you're being racist, or you're being closed-minded, or you're being selfish. Or it even could be labeling someone with a political label. I think that can be, again, really dangerous to the degree that you could just listen openly to people and try to avoid labeling them. That will also encourage them not to label you.
I think that's a great point. And I am mindful. I'm not necessarily having in addition, I think, Trisha, what you shared is perfect and spot on. And I think in addition, I'm mindful that sometimes people will label us or label the topic in ways that are intentionally inflammatory. And so one of the tips I would offer is, you don't necessarily have to call it the same thing somebody else calls it. So if somebody else is, using a particularly inflammatory label, like if you're engaged in equity work and they're and they're either framing it as that you're being woke, or that you're being or being racist, or like either, like one of the things that happens a lot of times when school districts start to engage in equity work is that you get attacked from both sides of the political spectrum. And I think you can sidestep some of that polarizing aspect of the argument by bringing it back and using your own language to define the work that you're doing, to talk about the importance of serving all children, of ensuring that all children and community members feel like they belong in the public schools. Belonging is a great word that we're finding people from both ends of the spectrum can understand and feel less triggered by the idea that we are seeking to create a space where everyone belongs. Seems to be a topic that whether people are on one end or the other of the political spectrum, they find value in that. But you don't necessarily, one of the things a wise mentor told me is you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. So people might frame a topic in a way that's intentionally inflammatory, or intentionally, they can engage in straw man arguments to make the other side of their perspective, the person who holds an opposing perspective from them seem ridiculous. And you don't have to jump into that argument. You don't have to defend or argue these topics. You can bring it back to what you are doing for your community's children. Like, this isn't about what's happening in DC or Olympia. This is what's happening in Goldendale or Everett or Spokane, right? You can pull it back to your own community. I think that's a way to, while it's not exactly on point with the question you asked about trigger words to avoid, I hope that by turning, maybe I'm doing that exact thing. I'm framing it the way I would like to frame it, but I think that can be really a helpful skill to nurture. And if I come up with some other trigger words over the next couple of minutes, I will circle back to that.
That's great. So we have about 5 minutes left, and we have two more questions. And this one actually is a great follow-up for the one that you just addressed, which is how do you handle listening when a person is saying something that makes other community members feel unsafe, or maybe even makes you as the board member feel unsafe? She gave the example, of the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But of course, there are many other topics in which someone may be saying something inflammatory that you feel that doesn't feel safe to you or other people potentially in the room.
I think there's a fine line to walk, because we want to avoid the issue of then kind of responding in kind and othering the person who is engaging in othering behavior, because by doing that, we're not advancing the dialogue. At the same time, we do have to, it's important to set boundaries as a leader to indicate that we will treat one another with respect and inclusion, that everyone is welcome in this conversation, and that you will not allow any one member of the community to others, that you will not allow anybody to get pulled out of the conversation or to be singled out. And so I think, first of all, doing that good stress management, maintaining your own sense of groundedness and your own being clear in your responsibility and opportunity as a leader to set the expectations, to then clarify what are your community values. So when you see someone behaving in a way that is contrary to your community values for inclusion, respect, kindness, honesty, like, we can say hard things, and we can say it without being abusive or personalizing issues. And so saying that exactly, say, this is a topic that brings out really strong emotions. And I often will express compassion when I'm going to engage in correction. So I might say, this is something that brings out really strong feelings, and I understand those feelings, and I have strong feelings myself. That said, in this setting, we have a value on respect, inclusion, and kindness. And I'd like to pause and give you an opportunity to reframe your question. Or I might, instead of giving them, I might say, I'm going to go ahead and reframe this question in a way. I think what you're getting at is around this. And here are the ways that our district is approaching this issue. Or, so I either give them an opportunity to reframe their question, or I might reframe the topic and move it forward in a way that feels productive, while making clear that we don't engage in personalized attacks or attacks based on demographics.
That's great. Great response there. So our last question, and I might take a crack at this first, J. Marie, and then let you come add anything that you think would be helpful here. This is a question around emails. And what are some of the best general practices around answering emails that are sent to the entire board? And then a note here with a smile that 9 times out of 10 they aren't complimentary. Indeed, that is so true. I very rarely see an email come to the whole board that says you all are doing a great job. Wouldn't that be nice though? So a couple things I'll pipe in on here and then let J. Marie add to that, and then we'll wrap up the webinar today. Um, I would recommend that your board have some operating protocols that answer this question. So your board should have some procedures that you follow around emails. Some boards automatically have the board chair, board president, respond on behalf of the board to all emails or other inquiries. Sometimes it's someone else who's been designated. It might not be the president or chair, but it might be maybe a designated secretary, board secretary who responds to it. Those are some ways to do it. If you don't do it that way, I recommend that you have a conversation with your whole board about how do we want to handle these, because the worst practice is when a couple of you are responding back, the rest of you aren't, and those two who are responding are saying different things, because then that gets really confusing to your audience there. So really, to the degree that your board can agree on that ahead of time and stick to those protocols or help, that would be helpful. What would you add there, J. Marie?
Not a darn thing, except I noticed the time. So I'd ask if you would advance the slide one more forward.
Yep.
So I want to thank all of you for taking the time to attend this session, because as I said at the top of the hour, I really have a deep passion around this information. I think it's really important. And I appreciate you valuing it as well. I'm in the midst of rolling out a whole new set of classes, and the way that I organize classes these days is that I encourage organizations to create their own internal class. So for instance, if you as a board would like to have a work session where a portion of the work session is spent on training, I am available to come in and provide training like that and then facilitate dialogue between you all afterwards. Or staff members often will bring me in to provide some training related, for a team or for a particular school or department. And that is really some of the most, like today, some of the most joyful work that I do. So thank you all very much. Thank you, WSSDA and Tricia, for giving me this opportunity to share time with you all. And I wish each of you a really lovely, productive day.
Yes. Thank you so much, J. Marie. Really appreciate you joining us, and appreciate having all of you join us today. Just a couple reminders. There are some upcoming trainings. So I know you all are aware that there are some legislatively required trainings. We are offering several of them in a remote format. This is just a screenshot of what our calendar looks like on the WSSDA website for May and June. These are the last few educational equity trainings that we're offering until fall. So grab them now if you have a chance to do that. And we just want to thank you all for joining us today, and hope that you will join us next time. Next month, we're going to cover the topic of demystifying parliamentary procedure. So if you are puzzled by how that works, join us, and hope the rest of you have a great rest of the day and a good week. Thanks so much.